to Mackenzie Chen and Craig Robinson from NBC Universal.
Hi. Thank you all so much for watching my film, and to Bentonville for being such an incredible support, not just to this film, but to my journey as a filmmaker. It's truly a game changer for me in regards to my path and my career. So thank you.
Mackenzie, wow. I met Mackenzie, first of all, congratulations. Also, congratulations to the entire team from Fish Out of Town. Really enjoyed that film as well, and I'm just so struck by both films and how they, from such a different perspective, talk about so many of the same issues. Inclusion, alienation, not belonging, teen angst, fear. So seeing these two back to back, I think it's very, very powerful. I met Mackenzie virtually about 2 years ago when we were so honored to be able to make the grant for this film. And then to meet today, 2 years later, and to see the film, I saw it for the first time. I'm actually really glad I hadn't seen it before. Thank you for the content warning too, because I have very delicate ears, and so I use but it's quite extraordinary. I must say that it's quite an extraordinary film. And I had some questions that I still want to ask, but having seen the film, it sort of reframes the questions. I'm going to start with a statement, and I do love very much that at a time when so many communities are underrepresented, that you are bringing a voice to young black women. Because appropriately, we've been talking a lot about the challenges of the black population, and black men in particular, because of some of the events we've seen over the past couple of years and continue to see, sadly. But I thought that's a very, very important perspective, and it reminds me, you as a filmmaker, and also Fish Out of Town. It brings to life what the Bentonville Film Festival is about, and that is this perspectives. I think this film could only be made by you because of the perspective you bring, and likewise for Fish Out of Town. So I just want to make that as a comment before I ask any questions, but again, congratulations. One of the reasons this was so important to us is because I work at NBC Universal. I'm the head of corporate diversity, and I work with our film team, and we have a number of programs. But what we know is that sometimes, strangely, and I'd like to hear your opinion on this because I'm a corporate guy, getting the first film made is really hard, and what we hear is the second one can almost be harder. So I'd like to know if is that just kind of a myth, or what your experience has been, because I know that you were an honoree previously, so this is at least your second film, is that right?
Yes and no. Okay. So I was here in 2019 with a feature that I wrote and helped produce called Olympia. And that was really my first kind of moment in the film world. I've been an actor for a really long time, and I do a lot of theater. I'm based in Chicago, which is a great theater town. But I found myself a little bit bored and feeling limited by what was available to me as an actor, and I found myself writing Olympia. I didn't feel like I knew enough about filmmaking at the time to also direct it, so I enlisted help. A friend I knew who's a great director and was able to get a fellowship that same year. So the process of making Olympia was actually quite fast and not at all the norm for making a feature film. And it did so much better, I think, than any of us expected it to do. But it was that experience that made me realize that I knew more than I was giving myself credit for. Like, I think one of the Coca-Cola filmmakers said earlier, it's such a true thing. And that was the thing that made me realize, oh no, I do know what I'm doing. I do know how to tell stories. And I want to move into the directing space. So a real one is my endeavor in that direction. So, while not my first film, it's my first film as director. And that has definitely been a journey. Thankfully, it began here at Bentonville, where the kind of support that filmmakers can find is really unparalleled. So I feel like I've been really fortunate in that regard. But it has been a journey. There is a feature version of a real one that we are using this short to move towards. And yeah, I have already in that process sensed the hurdles that are, that are kind of along the path to getting this second project off the ground.
Well, I think that point about that you were or are an actor, but that you also felt that you wanted to move into this space of directing and telling stories that you weren't seeing being offered to you. And a lot of the work that we do at NBC Universal also, because we work in news and have television stations, is the conversation about the people that are presenting the news readers, as they call them in the UK, and the anchors, and the people that are working in the newsrooms who are shaping the editorial. And that's what we often say to young to people of all ages in the newsrooms, that the jobs that get a lot of attention are the ones that are in front of the camera very often. But you can have such an impact by writing the story and controlling the narrative, which is what you so clearly did here. When you said that it came more quickly and perhaps a little more easily, is probably would be putting it, but quickly than you thought, that was one of my first questions, and that is, what was, as you speak to your future self and as you talk to other filmmakers, what was far harder than you thought about this, and what was not as much of a challenge for the real one as you thought? Because there had to be some things, probably for all of the filmmakers here, it was like, oh my God, that was easier than I thought. And this other thing that I hadn't given any thought to turned out to be a real challenge.
Wow, that's an excellent question. What was easier than I thought? When I first decided that I was going to learn as much as I could about directing, more or less by doing it, right? I didn't go to film school. I realized that my education was gonna have to happen on the ground, like in the process. And I had a lot of imposter syndrome about it. I was very nervous. I was like, I don't know how to choose a lens. There's a lot of technical knowledge that I didn't have. But then I realized, I had some great mentors, some great people around me who made me realize that my job as a director isn't necessarily to know all of them. It's useful, but my job is to know the story inside and out, and to communicate that to my collaborators and keep us all telling the same story. And once I realized that, and that I did know that the story was inside of me, and that I could hold the story for our entire team, then I realized, oh, okay, then I felt like I was swimming. Then I felt like I knew exactly what I was doing. I knew how to talk to my DP. I hired a DP that I trusted implicitly, who's
Director of photography.
Yes, our director of photography. I've worked with her before. I love her sensibility, her ability to translate what a moment should feel like to the visual image, so that I could just say, this is what this is, and then let her artistry take shape and not micromanage, right? So I felt like I was in a position to enable a lot of the artists around me in a way that I just find really satisfying because of the collaborative nature of it all. Theater also incredibly collaborative, so that's something I felt really comfortable with almost immediately, and I could release a lot of the fear I had prior. So that was actually a really lovely surprise. The thing that was something that was harder than I anticipated, I write.
Or just different.
Yeah, well, I mean, I write from a place of truth. When I'm writing something, I can kind of see it happening. And so for me, it's not so much a process of writing, it's really about transcribing what's kind of already happening in my head and my heart. And I kind of trust that, and I try not to second guess myself too much, and I go back and edit and refine and all of that. And that's very just intuitive and not easy process for me, but there's a flow that I find in that solo space. It's a really different thing taking it to a team and saying, hi, okay, bring this to life, especially with the actors, and especially asking them to enter some really vulnerable spaces and subject matter, and having to think about, okay, how do I've written this thing because it feels like the truth that I want to tell, but then how do I shepherd them through this process in a way where I feel like I'm taking care of them, but that also allowing them to enter a space that's a little bit dangerous, and and that can embody the truth that I was trying to find on the page.
I have to tell you, the two main actors are breathtaking. I mean, I found them breathtaking. So young, clearly but also very special people and under special direction to plumb those feelings that were quite raw there and in such an authentic way. I can't wait to watch them both, continue to watch them both in their careers. How did you find them?
So Eris, who played Lauren, some of you might recognize, she played Tess in This Is Us for the entire run of that show, which I love.
NBC Universal show.
NBC Universal, there's a connection there.
Did not know that. That was not an NBC plug, but yes, of course. This Is Us.
Yes.
On streaming on Peacock.
And I've been watching that show for years, and I remember watching an episode and just thinking she has the energy of this character and how I conceived of this character. I didn't really know if getting a name actor was a possibility for us, but my amazing producer Lisa Masur said we should try it, we should go for it. So we were able to contact her reps, send her the script, and her parents the script. She just turned, actually she'll be 18 this year. So that her family was very much involved in the process from top to bottom. And they loved it immediately. They immediately loved it. We just had a conversation via Zoom, and she came on board, which is just fantastic. And then Ariane, who played Keisha, I've actually known for quite some time. Ariane's actually a little bit older. She's in her early 20s, and I was worried that the age difference would be a weird dynamic, but they're such strong actors, and their chemistry was so immediate that I knew we'd made a really strong choice in terms of casting. Ariane is one of the best actors I know. She was on a series called 4400 that unfortunately only got one season, but she's also, she's constantly working. She's in a feature right now that's at festivals. She was just at Tribeca. She's all over the place, and someone who I'm absolutely certain that you will see quite a bit in the future.
Wow. Well, I would say the jackpot with both of them in very different ways. You touched on this a little bit, and I just have a couple more questions. I think we got a little bit of a late start. I don't want to hold people up, and I want to also offer the opportunity for questions from the audience. But you are, you talked about the process for you, and then I think that there are, I'm guessing, have been people to whom you've looked up and thought that's my inspiration. You are now that person for other young filmmakers, whether I know imposter syndrome or not, whether you accept that. What advice would you give, one piece of advice would you give to someone who was you 4 years ago, 3-4 years ago, as when they sit there with either moments of doubt or moments when they should be more doubtful, or just what should they know? What would you tell them if you could put your arm around each of these young men and women who are the you 5 years ago?
Yeah, I would say trust what's inside of you. It's it's so rich, and we all have such deep wells once we realize that it's there, and once we have the courage to draw from them in an uncompromising way. I think it's also really important to, I don't know, looking inside of myself is really important to me as a filmmaker, because that's the place I can look where I know that what I have to say has truth and power. I sometimes, I sometimes get frustrated because I think there's a lot of content out there that, looks really cool, but isn't telling the truth, isn't actually saying something. There's a lot of hollow stuff out there. And I think when we actually trust what's inside of us, we realize what it is we have to offer to the world around us. And I think that's the greatest gift we can give ourselves and our artistic communities and our audiences. And the more we trust that, the more we can access it.
That's fantastic. You teased this a little bit. You said this is part of the journey to a feature on the same story. Okay, so what is next in this process? And what are you doing as soon as you leave here? I'm sure you're making some phone calls and raising money and doing other things.
Yeah, I mean that's been a process since about 2021. I actually ended up writing the feature version before we shot the short. Yeah, the pandemic happened, everything shut down, and I'd already written the short, and I thought, well, let me make sure my ducks in a row so that when things are safe, we can shoot. And I ended up I wanted to explore the world more deeply, and ended up starting the draft of the feature version. Got some amazing support from Sundance, from Chicago International, from the Gotham, And so it's had a lot of development, which has been really exciting now to go back and be with the short and kind of start the process of sharing the story in this way. So we've done a lot. We've had a lot of conversations. Our process is slowed down a little bit right now. We're in the middle of a writer's strike. And so because of that, we're all in this moment where as artists we're working towards greater equity, greater pay, so that the work that we can do is sustainable, right, for the people who are doing that work. It's a really important fight. So while that's happening, we're not able to kind of go out and cultivate the partnerships that we want to, but we know that once we're on the other side of that, we'll be able to do so in a much stronger way. So the feature version is coming, but just in her own time.
Is there a blog that we can follow, or something we can follow, so we can follow the progress of the feature?
Absolutely. We're on Instagram. It's at A Real One Film. Yeah, the number one, not the word. And then we have a website, the same thing, arealoneFilm.com.
Good. Follow that. Any questions from the audience? Please.
Congratulations. Sorry, it's a very delicate subject. It's very, very serious. I wonder, congratulations on your sensibility on dealing with. I'm wondering, what were the kinds of, or what's your thought process on, developing it and, dealing with, especially young actors and very young, and, how to treat such a sensitive.
Thank you for that question. I knew I wanted to write a short film around young people. I teach during the summer. I teach teens during the summer, so it's a group that's very close to my heart, and I feel very much the need to kind of protect them a lot. And I think like a lot of us have been thinking about the kind of unfolding of the Me Too movement over the last few years. And one thing that frustrates me is that I feel like Black women are kind of left out of the conversation a lot. And similarly with the kind of struggles toward racial justice that we've seen over the last few years, Black women, I think, are also kind of considered much later in those conversations. So I wanted to write a story that, that dealt with that, but not, I didn't want that to be the story, right? I wanted that to be an element, but I really wanted to root it in friendship, because one of the things that I also believe is that because a lot of times we're left out of these conversations, that we end up being one another's greatest support. I kept asking myself, who's looking out for the Black women in the world? And the answer time and time again was other Black women. It's always other Black women. And looking out for everybody else around us too. And so I wanted to just write a story that really focused on the power and the depth, and the power and the depth of that kind of love and that kind of connection.
That's certainly what I took away. I mean, I will tell you that, and the way, the last few moments are just exactly what I was hoping they would be, but only even brought to life even better. Because the other story, of course, and there's a lot crammed in there, as we all just saw, but it's about, there are lots of things in there, including people that abuse the imbalance of power, but for it to come back, because there's a darkness to the story, certainly, and a controversial aspect, but have it be brought back to Keisha and Lauren, and the friendship and the power of them, the forgiveness on both sides is extraordinary. I saw one other hand, I think. Yes, please.
What in your early life inspired you to want to be a filmmaker?
Oh, thank you. What a great question. When I look back, I realized that I was always supposed to be a filmmaker. I just did not trust it. When I was a kid, I instead of going out to play and ride bikes, I would write in my little stories in my journal. I'm part of a generation that, I remember when we got our very first computer in our home. We put it on the kitchen table because we didn't know what to do with it. And I taught myself to type by transcribing what I'd written in my journals onto our computer. So storytelling has always been central. I would have my sister's a great artist. I would have her illustrate the stories that I would write, and we'd staple them together on computer paper, make little books. I taught myself photography as a kid. All the elements of filmmaking were the things that I was intrinsically interested in as a kid. I decided to become an actor, largely because I thought I was going to be a writer, but I didn't trust that what I was interested in was interesting to other people. it was a long time before I realized that that is just that a filmmaker is that all the things that I am add up to film, add up to visual storytelling. And it's really lovely to be in a room with so many young people who have made that realization a lot earlier than I have. But I feel like all the experiences that I've had have enriched me in a place where I feel like I very much know what I have to say and do in the world, and really guided by that.
Well, to be respectful of the time, we're going to wrap with that. I think it's a great question to wrap with, because I think when you talk to most great filmmakers, the stories are very similar. It wasn't something they woke up when they were 17 decided to do. They were making films when they were like 6 and 7, and always a storyteller. It is extraordinary, I say, tell you personally, I can't wait to go back and talk to my colleagues that that this was our first grant of its type. I know that there was additional monies that you needed, but I think that we went a long way towards seeding this, and that it that it's such an essential tool to the feature. And I know that when I talk to people in 50 years, I'm going to say, well, you know, Mackenzie Chin, well, we were there in the early years with a supporting grant for the short for a real one, and I will say that with pride. And I think a lot of other people in here will also remember that name. So thank you all for your time and attention, and Mackenzie, thank you, and the best of luck to you and all the other filmmakers in the audience.